Okay, in this video, we are going to discuss equations and inequalities. So this is our second and third type of mathematical statement. I've already discussed this extensively in the grade 9 module, algebraic expressions, where I talked about expressions. Right? Then we spoke about equations, then inequalities, and then the fourth type is what we call identities. Just to give you a nice overview of what we talked about and what we are going to talk about is the mathematical statements that we deal with, which is expressions, equations, and inequalities. The algebraic expressions module, this entire module is under the algebra course, the factorization and product course, and exponents and equations are what we're going to discuss now. Right, so here you can see it quite nicely. In the grade 9 expressions course, I talked about the three mathematical statements, which are expressions, equations, and inequalities. Then we moved on to products and factorization, rational expressions, and exponents. Right, so now we're going to talk about equations and inequalities. Right, equations and inequalities. We discussed how it differs from expressions in that it has an equality sign. We discussed that the progression from words to sentences to stories is similar to that from numbers to algebraic expressions to equations. The equations tells stories in maths. We will utilize equations to solve for unknowns and build stories. We also said that when we are solving for equations, we simply follow the order of operations in reverse. So that is the BODMAS rule. We follow it in reverse from right to left. We will use the inverse property of operations in order to isolate variables and solve, something that I've talked about extensively in the grade 9 algebraic expressions course. So I hope by now that you're starting to link your knowledge and not look at things in isolation, because we've talked about this extensively and I'm giving you a nice overview on the topic. We will begin with our discussions with linear equations, so equations that have the highest degree of 1. So again, exactly as we've discussed with factorization, I said that a trinomial that has a highest degree of 2 has an x squared term in it. That's the highest term that it will have. The variable will have the highest power of 2. Now, when you look at linear equation, we're saying that the variable will have the highest power of 1 and nothing more. So this is what we call a linear equation. So you have linear, and this is what we call a quadratic. So when you see the 2, that this is what we call quadratic equations. When you see the 1, that's what we call linear equations. Understood? So the highest degree of 1, linear equations. Highest degree of 2, quadratic equations. We will later discuss simultaneous equation and discuss its practical use. Finally, we'll shift our focus to word problems, literal equations, and linear inequalities. So that's basically what we have here. This is our course of actions for the next 4 weeks, which is the exponents part, which I've discussed extensively. Then we're doing this too now, linear equations and quadratic equations. Then we'll move on to simultaneous equations, word problems, literal equations, and linear inequalities.